we're here for the Gigabyte factory tour. We're going to be taking a look at everything from surface mount components to dip, which is through hole, manual placement, robotic placement, and packaging. Like not just packing the finished components in the box, but there are boxing robots, box packing robots, and really quite a lot of interesting stuff. Now the first thing they've got set up for us are these blank printed circuit boards. Now these look like the modern X99 motherboards that didn't pass quality control or something like that, because we can see that there's an X scratched on it. But these little stations are set up so that our group can actually place through-hole components on the motherboard. Now typically surface mount components are placed by robots, and larger components may be placed by people or robots. And the Gigabyte factory was, sort of using a combination of robots for surface mount components and people for through-hole components. Now I actually got through this exercise pretty quickly. They expected me to make a lot more mistakes, but the only mistake that I made was using the wrong size capacitors along the voltage regulation side. But hey, not too bad. They give me a comb and some other stuff for completing that successfully. When you do this little exercise, you realize just how much work goes into an individual motherboard. I mean, a typical motherboard like this is going to have in excess of 10,000 components that have to be placed on a printed circuit board. Now, at this facility, they don't actually manufacture the printed circuit boards, but for the surface mount components and things like that, they've got these elaborate robotic machines that place the components, and then sort of robotic ovens, wave soldering devices that they send the stuff through to actually be soldered. Now, a lot of the time you'll see these larger components referred to as through-hole components or dip components. Dip in this case, at this particular factory, are just the larger components that have pins that go all the way through the motherboard. If you ever are curious sometime, look at a motherboard and look at how small some of those components are. And so these components are picked up and placed on the motherboard robotically, along with some solder paste, so that once all the components are placed, it can go through a soldering reflow oven, which is kind of like a large pizza oven, and the whole thing's heated up and everything sort of melts. These tapes and ribbons contain, capacitors, resistors, transistors, other integrated circuits that are placed robotically on these motherboards. And so then we have this conveyor system as the motherboard or the graphics card or whatever it is that we're looking at moves from machine to machine to machine. Each machine is responsible for placing a number of components on the motherboard. Here we can see these motherboards have a CPU socket placed on them along with the protective cover, and we also see the PCH chip and a few other components placed on the motherboard. But you can also tell that it's very, very far from completion. After the circuit boards have made it through a few different sets of machines, they're handed off to people that can do a quality control inspection and make sure that the motherboard is sort of okay so far. Once all the robotic soldering is done, it's passed off to a very long conveyor system where individual people are placing components just like we were at the start of the factory tour. And so as one of the last steps, we'll see assembly workers actually making sure that all the components are properly snapped into their sort of through-hole landing spots, and then the conveyor system gets the motherboard ready to actually send the whole thing in to be soldered in a reflow oven. We can see here on these motherboards that the components have not been soldered in yet, and if you were to just grab and pick up a motherboard, the components would fall out because they're not soldered in yet. Here's one of the conveyor things that actually splits the thing in two. So the motherboards come in and every other motherboard goes out one side and every other motherboard goes out the other, and that helps sort of speed things along. Now they wouldn't let us see everything in the factory tour, but this is one of the test apparatuses, and so for quality control, they will pull motherboards off of the assembly line and test it in an apparatus like this. Now this apparatus is actually ancient, which is why we were able to film it. This is like a P85 or something ancient like that. But then here we can see, sort of all of the finished components from all of the different lines in this factory. Of course, we got the GTX 1080 Founders Edition that they had set up for us here, but motherboards, graphics cards, the whole 9 yards. And just because the motherboard's put together doesn't mean it's ready to ship out. And so, there's yet more assembly and yet more stuff that has to be done. You got to convert the cardboard into boxes, and then you got to convert the boxes into filled boxes with product, and then you got to convert the filled boxes with product into more boxes that are actually shippable. So there's a ton of stuff. Here we can see some completed motherboards that are just in anti-static tubs awaiting assembly. And then we've got the box that was assembled by another box assembling machine. And then, we've got to put the motherboard in the anti-static bag, and then we've got to place the whole thing, in the box along with all of the other accessories. And this is done in an assembly line fashion. Even the boxes are really fascinating because we saw the motherboards being packed, and then the motherboards are packed into these individual boxes. And then the individual boxes are packed into these other boxes for shipping. And then it's like, okay, we need to wrap straps around the other axis of the box. How do we do that? Well, the conveyor system can actually rotate the box 90 degrees. We've got an obstacle for the box to hit and rotate 90 degrees and send into the next box pack strapping machine. I'm not sure what to call that, but it's not something I would want to get my arm caught in, I'll tell you that. And then there we have pallets and pallets of motherboards getting ready to go out to all the various retailers all over the world. And it's a very special privilege to be able to record video inside a factory like this, and the main reason that we were able to do that is because Broadwell E just launched, and pretty much all the products that we saw being assembled in there are no longer secret. I mean, of course, manufacturers like Gigabyte need months, if not years, of lead time for producing the motherboards that go with those products. And so it's a really interesting and unique situation to be able to see behind closed doors at a factory like this. And it was really fascinating to see the number of workers. You know, they have over 1,200 workers here, and they were actually setting up some new production lines they mentioned during the intro presentation. And the new production lines will be able to produce something like 5,000 component level pieces a day. So they're really going to be ramping up their production capacity. And they also mentioned that this is the only motherboard manufacturing facility in Taiwan. Everybody else has already moved to mainland China, but they don't have any intention of going anywhere. Seems like because 70% of their workforce has over 15 years of experience. So this was really fascinating. This is my first time inside a facility this large with this much equipment. I've got new appreciation for Factorio, the game, if you've ever played Factorio. Just watching the componentry move through the different assembly lines and watching different things happen, and then some machines would push every other box to another line, so they would have one line, and then there would be a machine that splits that line into two different lines to go through SMT reflow or through packaging or whatever. But this has been really a lot of fun. I'm Wendell, signing out. Someday I'll see you in the forums. Leave me some comments. Now, it's a very, very special privilege to be able to record. I'm not having any of this.